And here we are back for part two on powerful retreat planning. Let's jump back in. I wanted to shift into some scenarios for you. Okay.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I've actually wrote down these scenarios and I'm thinking, who's going to answer? Is it going to be Randall, the leader, the CEO, Randall, the speaker, or Randall, the facilitator? So we'll see what comes out. There's no wrong answers here, Randall. Okay. So scenario number one. If we know that we're going to be at a retreat and there are colleagues that are coming with negative feelings between them, there's animosity, there's judgmental attitudes. When should that get cleaned up? Yes, nemawashi is very important and we can nemawashi as much as we can, but is it realistic? Is it going to be pre-retreat that we're expecting this to happen? Is it going to be on that journey on the retreat? Or is it like once they're invigorated and aligned, it's easier to do post-retreat? Like how, obviously the answer is all three has to be managed, but like whose role is that to play? Is it the leader? Is it us as presenters?
So let's be very clear. Most leaders, successful leaders, who've grown their organization to a particular size, they're not idiots, right? And they likely know of some of these things, and they've been trying to fix that along the way, right? So I can only presume that when there's issues of that nature, they're aware of them and they're doing their best to actually resolve them just in the normal course of how the business is actually growing and how the organization is functioning. Um, One of your earlier questions was what's fixable on a retreat? And we have to be very clear about some things. If it takes you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it wasn't taken down in a day either. Well, maybe it was, okay, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that whatever we do in a retreat, and you're right, before, during, and after, whatever we do during the retreat can grease the wheels that can help resolve some of the issues. Now, why are there issues? Sometimes it's misunderstanding. Okay. Sometimes it's lack of knowledge. Sometimes it's lack of the tools to do things. Some people, might not have learned a particular management or leadership or conflict resolution technique or process, etc. Sometimes it's a misalignment of objectives, right? Sometimes it's just, I don't know, you just don't like the person, right? For whatever reason. So a lot of those things we can start to address at the retreat. Oh, it feels so good. You know this as well when you're up in front of these people and all of a sudden, ding, light bulb goes on. Or maybe at a break, somebody comes up to you and says, I just never thought of it that way. I think this can make a real difference, right? As people who lead retreats, we absolutely love that. We live for those moments. But Rome was not built in a day, right? And when there's this kind of conflict, it's a question of starting to peel away the layers and sort of putting in place some of the parts that actually can make a difference. I will say that anybody thinks that interpersonal conflict or passive aggressiveness or any of these other kinds of dysfunctional behavior will be fixed magically by going away is delusional. Um, you know, Things that have been percolating for so long and have become entrenched, they have to be unwired. Okay, and we can make a big difference, but that's kind of where coaching might come in. That's of the person's manager, not just them. Okay, that's where, for example, slight change by removing irritants. Okay, it might be a structural change. It may be some job responsibility change. I'm not so sure exactly, but there's ways of sort of addressing that are well beyond the scope of a retreat. But interestingly, for a lot of clients, certainly in the past, we've had conversations afterwards where we said, "Hey, listen, beyond what we did in the retreat, here's a whole bunch of interesting observations that we had from the interviews and from the retreat conversations, etc. And here's how you might consider looking at these. Once again, I talked about the impact meeting 30 days out, right? And so these are some of the tools that we could leave with leaders so that they can start to continue the fixing of the conflicts. And by the way, some conflict is good because that can explore, if everyone's always agreeing to everything, okay, how do you get benefit from the differences, the different perspectives and everything? And I think that we just want to make sure that if there is conflict, that it's constructive, Okay, it's task focused. Okay, it's talking about um, the things that'll move the enterprise as a whole forward, as opposed to things that are dysfunctional and destructive.
Randall? Scenario number two. A theme that comes up often when we work with organizations is just how much the culture of the organization is really a mirror of the personalities of the leader or leadership team. When it comes to, leveraging the retreat to drive change, how do you handle it when the top leaders say, I do not have any problems. It is them that have the problems. Come and clean up the mess. So the leader sees themselves as beyond reproach or certainly not needing the change.
That's an interesting one. And it becomes a very simple thing. We could just sort of lay down and we could just say, okay, that's fine. Okay, no problem. I agree. Okay. And then we can just do whatever we do and we can sort of put lipstick on the pig, if you will. And now the pig is got beautiful lipstick and stuff, but the problem still actually exists. Okay, so that might be one approach. Another approach is to say, maybe just maybe the reason why the organization is so successful is because of that leader and their flaws and whatever it was, that's what got it, that's what got the organization to be there. And I think that we need to be very respectful of the fact that that is the leader who got us there, right? And maybe if all of a sudden it was a different leader, or if they were changed dramatically, they might not have, So oftentimes there's a situation where the organization starts off, it grows to a certain level. The leadership style, skills, approaches, the systems, the processes, okay, and by the way, the people, okay, um, that 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 are necessary to move to that next level just aren't there, right? It could very well be that the person who you had doing HR at the very beginning or head of sales might not understand how to run a big sales organization. Or the person who's doing operations, same thing, it's more complex. They might not be the right one. It could very well be that at a small size, you had lots of jack of all and Jills of all trades. And now you need to make some changes. It could be the technology, is also straining, etc. Most leaders recognize that they're not perfect. And most leaders, almost every leader I've ever worked with, has got a desire to do better. But they also have got egos. And I think that the conversation that you have as an advisor has got to be one that's incredibly sensitive and recognizing that if you want to help that leader get to that next level, you've got to work with what you have, right? And that's that particular leader's particular style, skills, etc. You could amplify the good. You can sort of address some of the toughest weaknesses in coaching and everything. But from a retreat perspective, they see that there's a problem, okay, and having a meaningful and fulsome conversation with them about their role in helping their team resolve that problem usually yields a particularly interesting outcome. I'll also say this, there's a very special role for that most senior leader at the retreat. Very often is to keep their mouth shut and for them just to take it in. Of course they're going to participate, right? But if they sort of if they fill in all the space, there won't be space for their team to either build the peer relationships or contribute their ideas to moving the enterprise forward, right? And observing, okay, it suddenly means that they have a different perspective because in a certain sense they're semi out of it. Now, what that means, though, from a retreat design perspective, is we have to make sure that there's ways that they can um, be in their role, not just as a participant and not just as a quote observer, which they are not, um, so that the expectations of the retreat are framed. Their views of the future and so on are framed. Where there's a chance for questions to be asked of them that might not be so comfortable. Here's a good example. One of the most effective techniques on that one is what I call a fireside chat. Sometimes it's very hard for the direct reports to ask or tell their boss something that they might not want to hear. But what if, for example, you had a fireside chat where that facilitator, who hopefully is senior enough to be a peer of the CEO or managing partner or director, can ask some of those questions and push a little bit. And as a naive outsider, they might not know where the sacred cows are. Of course, a lot of it will be pre-discussed beforehand. Nobody's going to get embarrassed, etc. But on the other hand, there could be some tougher questions that are asked. And if they're asked in a way that gives that leader a route to resolution of those issues, that's another technique that can be used to sort of have the conversation, right? And you can have the conversation beforehand by saying, by the way, here's some of the questions, just so we're clear, here's some of the questions that we're going to go on. Are you good with this? Right? And when the answer is yeah, okay, and usually they'll say, I'm an open book, I'm transparent. Good. You're going to demonstrate that, right? And it's refreshing because it's a different way of having the conversation rather than the executive standing up and doing the big presentation, right? It's just another way of making it more interesting. So
Scenario number 3, Randall. A client comes knocking on our door. This is, of course, purely theoretical, Randall, would never, ever, ever happen. And they want us to deliver at the retreat. They want Randall Craig to show up. And they tell us that their previous retreats, multiple retreats, have not been successful to have an impact on their organization. Okay, is this just bad luck, bad planning back to back to back for their retreats? Or would no impact indicate like a particular flaw? That's not
Oh, yes, a massive flaw. Okay, the biggest flaw, if a client says to us, the last number of retreats, they just haven't been good. So my question would be is, gee, why do you think they've all been bad? Why? And who's it? Einstein, I'm paraphrasing poorly, but if something doesn't work, keeping on doing it is not, is the height of insanity, right? So if the retreats aren't working, it's not the mechanism of retreats, okay? It's how they're planned, who's involved, what's everyone doing? How are people set up beforehand? What's the follow-up afterwards, right? How does it fit in with all the other sort of interventions that you do, whether it be coaching or training or the meetings that you have or your management systems and so on. So listen, it's not just, if the retreats are bad, you got to change it up, right? You got to do something differently, right? And otherwise, you're just gonna have another bad retreat. We had a client at one point, everyone thought the retreats were a great way to travel and see another part of the world, right? Let's go shopping. And you know what? In a certain sense, yeah, of course, there's a little bit of that excitement if the retreat is somewhere else. But if the goal of the retreat was to do A and B and C, and everybody in their mind thought, well, we're going to spend our time on the beach. This is going to be a great time, or shopping, or whatever it is, you know, it's not going to be successful. It will never be successful, right? On the other hand, if the expectations are set and everybody understands why they're doing it, and everyone understands their role on the retreat and how it fits into their day job and why, getting something out of, let's face it, if you're an attendee, you're being pulled away from your job. 2, 3, 4 days with travel, who knows however long the offsite actually is. And then what happens? Okay, you're told, so sorry, computers off, phones away. Okay. And then late at night, you might say, okay, let me just do a quick check, etc. But there's activities in the evening, so you finally get back to the office after being away for 2, 3, 4 days, and there's this massive backlog of stuff you've got to go to, which you just sort of dive into, and therefore everything, a lot of stuff gets forgotten, even the best intentions, right? But even worse, you say to yourself, why do I want to go to this retreat when it's going to be so stressful afterwards, right? So I think there's an awful lot that needs to be done in many organizations to make sure that when you're doing this incredibly expensive activity, that everybody feels that it's been a worthwhile time afterwards. And if it's not, the last several ones have not been hitting sort of that bell, it's time to make a change, and they've got to be done differently. You just can't afford not to.
I'm going to throw one more scenario at you, and then we're going to flip into some agenda planning sort of strategy. Um, Scenario number 4, Mr. Craig. We asked about, outside of like that hierarchy that you're inviting, should their high performers be included or who should be invited in terms of succession planning or advisors. At the other end of the extreme, if you are the leader of an organization and you look at who's, on the list of who's supposed to come to the retreat, and you know, feel certain names on the retreat on the list, these people are a drag. You question their potential. You question their tenure in the company. Is that like a signal of how would you handle that as leader?
I would say it's time to look in the mirror, right? If you feel about those people and the issues, should they come to retreat or not, um, why are they there? Or why are they in the position that they're in, right? And that's really more reflection on what you as a leader are doing day to day, not just what happens at the retreat. But you bring up a very good point, which is this. Let's just say there's going to be a very significant change. You're going to, I mentioned this before, a merger. You're going to announce a merger, right? Is it a good idea to do the retreat 1 month before the merger, 1 month after, right? Gee, there's going to be, you're opening a new business unit in such and such an area, or you think you're going to promote somebody up to a certain role, okay? Or you've decided that you're going to make a change, and move and let somebody go, whatever it happens to be, right? Is it a good idea to do a retreat just before all these things, or is it a better idea to do it afterwards? Some of these things you just can't help. Okay, you plan a retreat so long in advance, okay, and the business moves along and things change, and you're gonna have a retreat because it's been planned, and you can't unwind it, if you will. On the other hand, if you know some of these things are likely going to be happening, you want to make sure that the team moving forward is invited to retreat. That way, that nobody is a drag, right? Now, let's just put it this way. Everybody's got their own innovation style. Some people brainstorm ideas. Some people are really good at execution. Some people, though, are are the people that only see the negative. They see their role as being picking out that one thing that's going to prevent everything from, if they are not able to identify all the things that can go wrong, the whole plan is going to fall apart. Their job is to do that. So, a lot of people may see those people as the drag. Oh, they're not fun. They're a black hole. All they see is the negative. Well, the fact is that every management team needs every type of innovation style, right? Including those people that might uniquely be able to see the bad side of the reasons why something aren't going to be successful. So if there's somebody that you may feel fits into that particular category, I think it's worthwhile sort of exploring the fact that perhaps there's different innovation styles that are needed for a management team to move forward, right? And if that person truly is a drag, and it's not just, hey, they just like to optimize, if you will, then maybe that person needs some coaching, or maybe that person isn't in the right role, or maybe that person really shouldn't be in the organization. Their time is up, that they find it easier to drag stuff down instead of build stuff up, but once again, that's not a retreat issue. That's a let's be a great manager issue. Let's be a great leader issue.
Let's flip into some agenda planning. Okay, let's get into our brains here. So we talked about that balance between, the get to work and the fun, and you do need both to, have a successful retreat. But regarding these fun activities, is framing it as such like not understanding the opportunity? Like, we know that when people share an emotionally heightened adrenaline pumping experience, like it accelerates bonding, that like adrenaline can breathe more life into the output of the retreat. So do we want the relaxing wine tour, or the jumbo Jenga? Like, is it just about being silly, and is it just about memories and that's enough? Or would it be more strategic to create heightened experiences?
I think it depends on the specific type of group you have and the specific agenda. Okay, like the specific objectives. So I'm not the biggest fan of of doing these things where the adrenaline is pumping and everything, for the sake of that, right? If the goal is to build tighter relationships amongst the people who are there so that those relationships, you know, persevere, for example, afterwards. If somebody's having a personal um, um, adrenaline filled moment, right? That's not intimately pardon me, connected to relying on their teammates, for example, in a way that they can translate to a professional setting. Yeah, they can say, yes, so and so is going to prevent me from falling. Okay. But how often do you do that actually during the work? So, at one point that was like the fun thing, I think today it's more relegated to like high school leadership camps, okay, as opposed to corporate retreats. Um, I do think though, the question of making time for people to have conversations in different venues and formats than they normally have is very important. So, for example, the dinner, which might go for 2 or 3 hours, right? And which allows people to have those longer conversations. And then you move around during the dinner so that other conversations can be had with other people. Activities like going for a hike, if people are able to walk, for example, is actually a very interesting one because you have great conversations while you're walking, right? Not just while you're eating, right? So I think that sometimes we forget about things that are perhaps even simpler. Sometimes it's an experiential thing. One retreat that I led, excuse me, had it was um, um, in the East Coast of the United States. Everybody went kayaking, and half the kayaking was with one person. It was all two-person kayaks, and half was with the other. We kayaking looking at dolphins. Never done that before. That was really cool. But along the way, there's all these conversations that happen. It wasn't, let's learn about all the different dolphins and the shrimp that they eat, or I don't know, whatever it happens to be, or but it's really more about the conversation and the relationship building, right? So I think it really depends. You know, a younger group that is a lot more physically active might, something that's a little bit more physically active might resonate and be more effective than, say, a team that is much, much, much older and a lot more static in terms of their lifestyle, right? So it really depends on what, right? And I think that that's what makes them also so interesting, particularly if you go to an area that might be different than what some of the people are part of. Did one, for example, where one person was from the area, and they decided, part of the thing was a guided tour. Okay, where that person was the tour guide, like a walking tour, and learned all about the history of the area, right? So there's so many different ways of doing it, but you can't be tick the box. We're going to do the kayak, wine tour, dinner, whatever it happens to be, right? You have to eat, so fine, that one's in there, but all the other ones are dependent.
Let's talk about ESG considerations. Randall, you and I both completed levels 1, 2, 3 of the IGP board governance program, and talking about ESG and how to bring that into the decision making was top, on the agenda. So ESG, we have environment, social governance, and speaks to the corporate responsibility and sense of duty a company arguably ought to have to society. Okay, so let's go through them. E, okay, environment. We see now that many organizations are branding themselves as environmental first, sustainability. In fact, there's policy decisions certainly here in Canada about, net zero emissions, this kind of talk by a certain date. Yet we know all of these retreats require lots of emissions. We have travel and all kind of whatever else is happening there. Do you think like the public, the client that's being sold this environmental first like brand is going to get wise to that?
So I think we're seeing that already, okay, in the sense that you can buy carbon credits, right? You can choose venues that are just not so far away or that are a little bit more environmentally sensitive. Some of the choices of the activities that you might do can also. But what I'll also point out is this, and this is the environmental sustainability sort of factor. So much of business is being run virtually. Teams are in all kinds of different places. Leadership team is in all kinds of different places. And in the olden days of 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you just get on planes, you crisscross all over the place. And the amount of emissions and the environmental impact is just absolutely huge. There's a huge movement to virtual, but part of the quid pro quo is we have to manufacture reasons and opportunities for the team to actually get together and move the needle in ways that you can't always do virtually. And I think that that's perhaps one of the reasons why retreats are so popular is because it allows, it's almost like the grease that allows this virtual remote thing to actually happen. Putting aside the need to do planning together and a whole bunch of other things and big chunks of time together, etc. It's very, very, very hard to run an organization where there's a hybrid or remote workforce and where you as a management team aren't just down the hall from each other. And so that's part of the equation without a question.
Do you have any thoughts on how the level of luxury impacts the retreat? Like, is the magic in the luxury, or can the same outcome be had with a shoestring budget or less frills retreat?
Well, certainly for not-for-profits, the idea of going to a luxury, and certainly for charitable organizations, the idea of going to a place that's luxury is so totally inappropriate. I also think that I also think that if there's an executive retreat that's designed to plan something or to address a particular issue, etc., or there's a cash flow issue, etc., spending excessive money on luxury is also inappropriate. And I think most organizations realize that. I think some retreats, though, ones that are designed to reward achievement of sales goals, for example, there's an expectation that it's going to be luxurious, right? There's an expectation that this is actually a reward. It's kind of like part of the compensation, if you will, that gee, if you're in the president's club, if you've got the diamond, whatever it is, that we're going to take you and quote treat you right with stuff that you normally would never do yourself, right? And that sort of is part of that. So I think that sort of dynamic is part of it. I've certainly seen retreats where I thought the degree of luxury, was a bit over the top. Okay, but most of the time it's not. Okay, you want to stay in a place that's nice. Okay, but how nice does it really need to be? I don't think a large public company doing the retreat at a small town Holiday Inn would really, provide the amenities that would help the retreat, agenda really achieve its objectives. On the other hand, if you're going to be chunks of time in the boardroom or in, you know, working on something, etc., do you really need to fly all the way around the other end of the world to actually accomplish that objective? So I think nowadays, cash is a big issue. The economics are a big issue, and so people are very concerned about it. But since you mentioned about cost, let me just say these things are incredibly expensive. Incredibly expensive. I think think about how much money does it take to fly everybody to where it is? How about the hotel, right? Generally speaking, everyone gets their own room. We're not doing roommates. We're not putting a cot in rooms. It's not the food, right? Morning, noon, and night in these venues, the food is not cheap, right? Even if you go out, for example, you're going to go out for nicer meals, that sort of helps grease the wheels in a certain sense. There might be some wine involved at the meals, etc. But that's a lot of money. If there's any of these, we call them fun activities earlier, some of those things, they're not cheap, right? It takes time, a tour guide, the transportation to it, whatever it happens to be. Oh yes, everyone's being paid. So what's the cost, the salary cost of everybody who's there? If you've got 8 people or 6 people or 12 people, whatever the number of 20 people, multiply their cost, right? And that's just absolutely huge. Oh, and yes, by the way, business still goes on afterwards. And when they're actually at the retreat, they're not actually at the day job, doing the day job. So there's a big opportunity cost. Okay, that's actually there. The opportunity cost of work not being done or things that are missed or and everything. Um, all of this is massive. And that does not include the external facilitator and trainers that you actually have brought in, which is hopefully what's going to actually make the thing worthwhile. Everything else you have to do because you have to put bums in seats, if you will, right? But to spend all that money and not spend a little bit more on getting a competent external help is also, but that's not cheap either. It's not as expensive as all the other things, but it also costs if you want to get the right people helping you out there. So um, that's probably about as much about costs. If cost is an issue, there's always ways to slim it down. But I would not ever slim down the reason for actually going there, which is to provide that experiential moment for everyone who's there, the learning, the relationship building, and so on. And it just doesn't happen by magic.
On the subject of costs and how that affects choices, there's the actual dollars and there's actual perception within the organization. We worked with a client a little while back and they decided to host a virtual retreat rather than an in-person one for just that very reason, because of the optics of how it would hit the team, right? Do you think that's wise with the younger generation of people who, are critical of like, why didn't I get a raise while the corporate jet is running? Or do you think that was a lost opportunity to not bring the leadership team together in person? With that question, we're going to pause here our part 2 on effective team retreat planning. We'll pick up with more Q&A in part 3. If any of the topics we discussed so far resonate with you, if you'd like to hear our opinion or learn about our approach for your next retreat or offsite or conference or team training, do reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation. info@randallcraig.com or book a call, www.randallcraig.net/30, and we'll see you back for part 3.